Welcome to our podcast discussion on Africa's evolving infrastructure scene and the whole narrative surrounding Chinese investments. Over the past couple of decades, China has been very active in building large scale projects across almost every African country.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by that. So, what's been stirring up the debate about these projects?
Well, the conversation often centers on this idea of debt trap diplomacy, a notion that China's lending strategies are designed to snare African nations into unmanageable debt. But a closer look reveals that the claim is more myth than reality.
Right. But can you break down exactly what they mean by debt trap in this context?
Sure, the concept suggests that when countries take on Chinese loans for large infrastructure projects, they're being set up to fall into like a cycle of dependence and financial strain. However, the detailed analysis shows that the loan structures, the terms, and even the economic returns from these projects don't really support that narrative.
Yeah, interesting. So, is it like that the numbers just don't add up to a so called trap?
Exactly. For instance, take the projects in Ghana and the famous Tazara Railway in East Africa. While these have been cornerstones in discussions about debt traps, the reality is that these initiatives have, in many cases, enabled critical economic developments and enhanced connectivity rather than ensnaring nations.
So, the Tazara Railway, despite being a massive investment, isn't actually a strategic snare?
No, not really. These projects have provided much needed infrastructure improvements. It's like, giving a country a solid foundation to build upon rather than setting a trap.
Got it. But then why do Western critics keep coming back to the narrative of debt trap diplomacy?
That's a great question. Part of it stems from geopolitical rivalries and an ideological bias. Western discourse tends to frame these investments under a critical lens to underscore their own perspectives. But when you actually look at the terms, competitive rates, often very long repayment periods, it's clear that these are opportunities for genuine development rather than intentional financial ensnarement.
I see, but aren't there still some analysts who argue that even if the interest rates seem fair, there might be hidden costs in terms of political influence?
Absolutely, and that's a valid critique. Some insist that accepting these investments could come with strings attached on the diplomatic side. However, the available evidence, like what Bloomberg's exploration highlights, suggests that it's more about economic collaboration among partners than an outright strategy for domination.
Yep, that makes sense. So we're looking at partnerships here rather than predatory loans?
Right, exactly. These projects are often the result of mutual agreements, where African governments negotiate terms to fit their development needs. In many cases, the infrastructure built really does pay off in terms of boosting trade, connectivity, and overall growth. It's like a win-win scenario when you view the full picture.
But then, why do you think the debt trap narrative persists so strongly in media discussions?
Well, I think it's partly because such narratives capture the imagination. They make for a compelling story of power imbalance. Yet, when you dig into the details, you see that the risks of unsustainable debt are often exaggerated. The focus on potential perils can overshadow the benefits that come with improved infrastructure and development.
Yeah, I get that. It's almost like a rhetorical shortcut to cast doubt on any non Western financing.
Exactly. It's a kind of oversimplification. And there's another layer too. African nations themselves are not just passive recipients. They actively negotiate and use these funds to leapfrog into next generation infrastructure. That agility often gets ignored by the critics who push the debt trap idea.
That really highlights the agency of these countries. They're making strategic moves rather than being cornered.
Absolutely. It's a more nuanced picture. While there are cases where debt management needs careful handling, the blanket term debt trap doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Countries are pursuing investments with a clear eye on long-term growth and economic diversification.
Yep. And it sounds like these projects are really pivotal for overall development in Africa, right?
Exactly, they are. These large infrastructure projects, from railways to ports, are essential for boosting local economies and integrating them into global markets. Far from being traps, they're often strategic investments that can stimulate progress, provided they're managed well.
I totally agree. Though I still worry sometimes that the hype around political influence might overshadow all the positives. Have you seen any counterpoints addressing that?
I have, And while it's important to remain cautious, the overarching data and case studies suggest that the benefits have often outweighed the risks. It's like it's like taking a measured risk in any major development project. The notion of a trap simply doesn't align with the empirical outcomes we're seeing on the
Yeah.
ground.
So, from all this, it seems the so called myth of the Chinese debt trap is more politically charged than fact based.
Exactly. The narrative persists mostly because it's a neat storyline for those with stakes in Western strategic competition. Meanwhile, actual outcomes on the ground show that, in most cases, African nations are leveraging these opportunities for genuine advancement. It's a great reminder that we need to base our judgments on thorough analyses rather than just catchy slogans.
Wow, that really gives a fresh perspective. So, the takeaway is that while caution is necessary in all international finance, we shouldn't let oversimplified narratives obscure the real developmental gains.
Precisely. African governments are using these tools to drive progress, and it's important to recognize how these relationships operate on multifaceted levels economically, politically, and socially.
Yep. Thanks for this insightful breakdown. It's a reminder that these deep dives help untangle the spectrum between skepticism and opportunity.
Absolutely. It shows how vital it is to look at data and context carefully rather than buying into a single narrative. I'm glad we could explore this together.